Good morning, everybody. This is Yin Yang with Morsels of a Thought number 1108. And I am broadcasting on StreamYard today. So you see things, I think, the right way. Um, I'm not. I'm not sure where the camera is. Today it's Sunday, and I will be reading Our Town from Thornton Wilder. There we go. Last time we were talking about them, there were two people doing their homework through the windows, um, talking through the windows. And then there was some music in the background, and the orchestra was showing up. And the Simon Stimpson, the conductor, was asking for orchestra members to come to play at a wedding on next Tuesday. So we stopped there, and Dr. Gibbs said, "Oh, George, can you come down a minute?" And George says, "Yes, Pa." He descends the ladder. Dr. Gibbs, "Make yourself comfortable, George. I'll only keep you a minute." "George, how old are you?" "George, I'm 16, almost 17. Dr. Gibbs, "What do you want to do after school's over?" George, "Why, Pa, I want to be a farmer on Uncle Luke's farm." Dr. Gibbs, "You'll be willing, will you, to get up early and milk and feed the stock, and you'll be able to hoe and hay all day?" George, "Sure I will. What do you mean, Pa?" Dr. Gibbs, "Well, George, while I was in my office today, I heard a funny sound, and what do you think it was? It was your mother chopping wood. There you see your mother getting up early, cooking meals all day long, washing and ironing, and still she has to go out in the backyard and chop wood. I suppose she just got tired of asking you. She just gave up and decided it was easier to do it herself. And you eat her meals and put on the clothes she keeps nice for you, and you run off and play baseball, like she's some hired girl we keep around the house but that we don't like very much. Well, I knew all I had to do was call your attention to it. Here's a handkerchief, son. George, I've decided to raise your spending money 25 cents a week, not, of course, for chopping wood for your mother, because that's a present you give her, but because you're getting older, and I imagine there are lots of things you must find to do with it." George, "Thanks, Pa." Dr. Gibbs, "Let's see, tomorrow is your payday. You can count on it. Probably Rebecca feels she ought to have some more too. Wonder what could have happened to your mother. Choir practice never was as late as this before." George, "It's only 8:30, Pa." Dr. Gibbs, "I don't know why she's in that old choir. She hasn't any more voice than an old crow, traipsing around the streets at this hour of the night. Just what time you retired, don't you think?" George, "Yes, Pa." George mounts to his place on the ladder. Laughter and good nights can be heard on stage left, and presently Mrs. Gibbs, Mrs. Soames, and Mrs. Webb come down Main Street. When they arrive at the corner of the stage, they stop. Mrs. Soames, "Good night, Martha. Good night, Mr. Foster." Mrs. Webb, "I'll tell Mr. Webb. I know he'll want to put it in the paper." Mrs. Gibbs, "My, it's late." Mrs. Soames, "Good night, Irma." Mrs. Gibbs, "Real nice choir practice, wasn't it, Myrtle Webb? Look at that moon, will you? Potato weather for sure." They are silent for a moment, gazing up at the moon. Mrs. Soames, "Naturally, I should show you what's going on up there, I guess. Yeah, she's very interesting. That's little Dea up there. I think you can see her right there. I can't see her, but you can. Okay. Anyway, that was just what I wanted to show you to know what it was. And here we go again. Mrs. Soames. Miss Mrs. Soames, "Naturally, I didn't want to say a word about it in front of these others, but now we're alone. Really, it's the worst scandal that was ever in this town." Mrs. Gibbs, "What?" Mrs. Soames. Simon Stimson. Mrs. Gibbs. Now Luella. Mrs. Soames. But Julia, to have the organist of the church drink and drunk year after year, you know he was drunk tonight. Mrs. Gibbs. Now, Luella, we all know about Mr. Stimson, and we all know about the troubles he's been through, and Dr. Ferguson knows too. And if Dr. Ferguson keeps him on there in his job, the only thing the rest of us can do is just not to notice it. Mrs. Soames, not to notice it, but it's getting worse. Mrs. Webb, no, it isn't, Luella. It's getting better. I've been in that choir twice as long as you have. It doesn't happen anywhere near so often. My, I hate to go to bed on a night like this. I better hurry. Those children will be sitting up till all hours. Good night, Luella. They all exchange good nights. She hurries downstage, enters her house, and disappears. Mrs. Gibbs, can you get home safe, Luella? Mrs. Soames, it's as bright as day. I can see Mr. Soames scowling at the window now. You'd think we'd been to a dance the way the men folk carry on. More good nights. Mrs. Gibbs arrives at her home and passes through the trellis into the kitchen. Okay, so we're good on this. And I want to say, um, it was really fun yesterday, but we've got Sunday. I have converted the Saturday series to Sundays. Mondays, miscellaneous Mondays, we've been doing Marcus Aurelius, more meditations by Marcus Aurelius, translated by George Hayes, Hays. And then Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, we do The Rules by Ellen Fine and Sherry Schneider. And we're reading out of the Rules Handbook, a guide to creating loving and lasting relationships. And then we also have Wednesday, Words and Wisdom, and we've got a focus every Friday. So I just wanted to let you know that's what we're doing these days. And thank you for coming. I will see you later. And okay, old Kinderhook.